Snow fell in slow spirals from the heavy Adirondack sky, drifting like forgotten memories through the stillness of the forest. The pines wore it like shawls, bowed beneath its weight, silent and waiting. No birds sang, no squirrel rustled through the underbrush. Only the wind moved, curling like smoke through the trunks, carrying whispers only the old trees understood. Caleb Hart hadn't spoken a word in days. His boots crunched on the frostbitten trail, echoing in the white hush around him. A canvas bag bounced against his back, packed not with supplies, but with tools meant for cutting down what had once lived. His axe, well-oiled and rarely used now, rested in its sling against his shoulder, dull beneath its leather sheath. The man was not here to hunt, not even to gather. He walked for a different reason, a promise made long ago in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and lavender oil. "I want you to find it," Mary had whispered, her fingers like twigs, inside his calloused hand. "Where the trees lean and the light breaks strange, you'll know when you see it." He had nodded then, unable to speak, unable to tell her that her story of the place was just a dream, the fantasy of a girl raised on folklore and novels, but she had believed it. And after the machines had quieted and her breath no longer stirred the air between them, Caleb had packed his bag and driven until the roads ended and the forest began. 3 days now, he'd been here, among the pines, sleeping in a cold canvas tent by the edge of a half-frozen stream. He cooked beans over a single burner, drank water melted from snow, and spoke to no one, not even himself. On the morning of the 4th day, something changed. The snowfall had lightened to a thin veil. The wind stilled, and as Caleb pushed through, a narrow pass where the trees knotted close together, he heard it. Not a howl, not a growl, not even the distant call of a bird, a whimper. It was faint, trembling, like pain made sound. He stopped mid-stride, one boot sunk in powder, the other resting on brittle needles. His breath puffed before him, white against his dark beard. There it was again, higher this time, fragile. A cry. He turned off the trail instinctively, forging a path through the thickets, the sound drawing him like gravity. He moved carefully, though every step snapped twigs and disturbed the long rest of fallen snow. 30 feet in, he found it, a tangle of broken brush, claw marks streaked across a fallen birch trunk, and there, near its roots, something small and dark and moving. Caleb dropped to his knees. It was a wolf pup, barely breathing, its grey fur matted with blood and ice, one hind leg twisted unnaturally beneath it. Its eyes, bright amber despite the haze of pain, locked on his, not pleading, not afraid, just watching. Caleb's hand moved on instinct, slow and deliberate. He had never touched a wild wolf, never dreamed he'd get close enough. But the pup didn't flinch. It simply whimpered again, a sound that broke the frozen stillness like glass. As his fingers brushed against its flank, he felt the tremor of cold, the fever of infection. The pup exhaled a weak sigh, its body too small to hold such weight. Caleb took off his coat and wrapped it around the tiny body, lifting it gently. The animal didn't resist. He looked around. No sign of others. No blood trail from a mother. No tracks but his own and the pup's faint scuff marks. He whispered, the words strange on his lips after days of silence. "You're not supposed to be alone." Back at his camp, the fire was little more than coals. Caleb added pine branches, coaxed it back to life. He laid the pup near the heat, still wrapped in his coat, and examined the leg. Snapped, swollen, likely broken in more. Then one place, puncture wounds lined the belly, small but deep. Too small for another wolf. A bobcat maybe, or worse. He worked without speaking, without even thinking. Cleaned the wounds with snowmelt and iodine, made a splint from a birch branch and ducked, tape, fed the pup water from his cupped hands. It slept eventually, though its breathing stayed shallow. That night, he sat beside the fire, staring into the flames. The pup lay curled near his boots. Outside the circle of warmth, the woods pressed in close. He should have radioed the ranger station, should have turned the pup into someone with a license, a facility, proper medicine. But he didn't. He couldn't. Mary had told him once, there's a kind of magic in trust. Even wild things feel it. The pup had trusted him. In the morning, snow fell again. Caleb boiled rice and jerky into a thick, salty mash and fed tiny pieces to the pup, who licked them slowly, eyes half closed. Its leg remained swollen, but the bleeding had stopped. Caleb didn't speak, but his hands moved gently now, with purpose. He'd stopped counting the days. On the 5th night, something came to the edge of the firelight. He saw it just past the edge of the tent flap, a shape too large to be a deer, too low for a moose. It didn't move like a bear. It watched. He stood, slowly, careful not to startle it. The shape didn't flinch. Then, as the fire popped and the pup stirred in its sleep, the figure stepped forward. It was a wolf. Large. Female. Her fur was the color of river stones, flecked with white and dusk, grey. Her ribs showed faintly through her coat. Her eyes were gold. She didn't growl, didn't bare her teeth. Caleb didn't breathe. The mother stepped closer, her eyes not on him but on the pup. Her head tilted, her ears pricked forward. Then, impossibly, she sat. Caleb lowered himself to the ground beside the pup. "Is he yours?" he asked softly, though the answer was already in the air between them. The mother gave a sound, not a bark, not quite a whine, something deeper, older. The pup stirred, opened its eyes, and lifted its head. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the pup gave a weak yip and tried to rise. Caleb's hand went to its flank, steadying it. "Easy," he whispered. The mother wolf stood again and took one step forward. Caleb tensed, but she did not lunge, did not challenge. She looked at him, looked into him. He could feel it. Not aggression, not suspicion, something heavier, something ancient. Acknowledgement. He stepped aside. The mother came close, sniffed her pup from head to tail. She licked its ears, nuzzled its side. The pup whined, wriggled, tried to stand again, but its splintered leg buckled. The mother sat beside it. And then she looked at Caleb again. He didn't move. The wolf lifted her head and howled, once, long and low and haunting. The sound echoed through the trees, ricocheting off ice and bark and memory. Caleb stared into the dark where her voice had gone. Then silence returned, and the mother left. She vanished as quietly as she had come, disappearing into the snow-laced shadows. The pup cried once, softly, then curled against Caleb's boot and fell asleep again. He didn't sleep that night. In the morning, there were paw prints circling the camp, not just the mother's. A second set, then a third, a pack. They had come and left. He looked at the pup, now warm beneath his blanket, eyes closed, but breathing steady. "You're not alone," he said, though he didn't know if he meant the pup or himself, maybe both. He stayed another week. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was because the pup wouldn't survive long without its leg healing. Maybe it was because the mother had returned every other night since, always at a distance, always watching. Maybe it was because for the first time in years, Caleb Hart had a reason to speak. He named the pup Wren. It wasn't a proper wolf name, he knew, but Mary had always loved wrens. Their stubbornness, their joy, their songs louder than their size should allow. Wren healed slowly. The leg would never be perfect, but she grew stronger, louder. She began to howl, a broken, cracking sound that made Caleb smile even as it tugged at his heart. On the 12th day, the mother came again, Not alone this time. 2 other wolves flanked her, a younger female and a lean grey male. They waited in the trees. Wren whined when she saw them, tried to stand. Caleb helped her up. He didn't speak, just stepped back. The wolves didn't move. He crouched beside Wren, pressing his forehead to hers. "Go," he said. The pup turned and limped, slow, unsteady, but determined, toward her kin. The mother met her halfway. They circled her, sniffed, nuzzled, accepted. Then, without looking back, the pack turned and vanished into the trees. Caleb stood alone. The snow had stopped. The wind had changed, and somewhere, far off, a howl rose. Not one of pain, but of presence. He smiled. The axe never left its sling. He never found the place Mary had described, not exactly, but maybe he had found something better. The place where trust was enough. The wind came from the south that day, warmer than it had any right to be in March. It swept across the ridges and valleys of the Adirondacks, brushing through the skeletal branches like an old storyteller returning to whisper tales of green and growth. In Caleb Hart's camp, the breeze rattled the tarp of his tent and stirred the ashes of last night's fire, casting tiny spirals of soot into the morning air. He stirred from sleep slowly, his body stiff from sleeping on frozen ground, his joints aching with a quiet groan that came not just from age, but from living too long without purpose. The spot where Wren had once curled up beside his boots felt empty now, and the silence pressed against his ears like a drumbeat he couldn't unhear. It had been 5 days since she'd gone. He hadn't expected to miss the pup so much. After all, she was a wild thing, meant for snow and shadow, not for tarps and tents and the smell of smoke on canvas. But her absence had hollowed something in him. He caught himself reaching for the small wooden bowl he'd used for her water, glancing toward the spot where she used to sleep, listening for the soft huff of her breathing against the cold. She wasn't coming back, and that was good. It meant she was where she belonged, but that didn't mean the silence didn't ache. He made coffee over the fire and sat alone, cradling the chipped enamel mug between his palms, staring out at the trees. The steam curled up and vanished into the blue morning, and for a long while Caleb didn't move, until a twig snapped behind him. He turned sharply, instinct prickling. His hand moved toward the knife at his belt, but what stepped into the clearing wasn't a predator. It was a man, older than Caleb by a decade, maybe 2, thin, wrapped in layers of green and brown, with a beard like wild moss and a long staff carved with tiny animal faces. He didn't walk so much as blend forward, moving with a softness that reminded Caleb of the wolves. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then the old man spoke. "You're camping on the breath of the grove," he said, voice low and calm, like a stone dropped in still water. "You know what that means?" Caleb shook his head. "No," the old man nodded. "Didn't think you would. Most folks wouldn't. But they feel it anyway." Caleb gestured toward the fire. "You want some coffee?" The old man grinned. "I never say no to a warm cup." They sat across from each other, silence wrapping around them like the morning fog. Caleb poured the coffee. The old man sipped it slowly, like it was sacred. "You're not lost," he said finally, "but you're not found either." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "That so?" "I listen to trees," the man said, "and they've been talking about you." Caleb wasn't sure how to respond to that. He looked down into his mug. "I'm just out here, looking for something." "Not something," the man said. "Someone, and not just your wife." Caleb's fingers tightened around the metal handle. "You know about Mary?" "I know grief when I see it," the man said gently. "And I know when it starts to turn into something else." Caleb didn't answer. The trees shifted around them. A hawk cried high above the canopy, then vanished into silence again. "She sent you here," the old man went on. "Not just to find a place, but to find what was buried under all that hurt." Caleb stared at the fire. She used to say the woods could teach you anything, if you were quiet enough to listen. The old man nodded slowly. She wasn't wrong. They sat in silence for another long while. The old man finished his coffee and set the mug gently on the snow-covered ground. "I'm called Merrin," he said. "Some say I'm a hermit, others say I'm a lunatic, but I prefer caretaker." "Caretaker of what?" Caleb asked. "The spaces people forget," Merrin replied. "The cracks where the old ways still live." Caleb looked at him then. Really looked. There was something in Merrin's eyes, something ancient, unbroken by years. He wasn't mad, Caleb realized. He just lived in a truth too deep for most to wade into. Merrin stood, his staff pressing into the soil. "Come with me," he said. "There's something you need to see." Caleb hesitated, but then rose. He didn't know why he followed, only that some part of him already had. They walked in silence for nearly an hour, deeper into the woods, through winding animal trails and across frozen creeks. Merrin moved like he knew every tree by name, pausing now and then to touch bark or hum, beneath his breath. Eventually they reached a clearing, a low valley surrounded by ancient hemlocks. At the center stood a tree unlike any Caleb had seen. It rose tall and wide, its trunk split in two at the base like twin doors flung open. Its bark shimmered faintly in the sunlight, not with color, but with life. Roots curled like fingers into the frozen soil. Moss clung to its branches even in winter. "This," Merrin said reverently, "is the Hollow Sentinel." Caleb stepped forward, the air thick with silence. "She's older than any man living," Merrin continued. "Some say she's where all the wolves first howled. Others say she listens to the last thoughts of dying things." Caleb didn't speak. The tree loomed above him, massive, sacred, more than alive. It hummed, almost imperceptibly, like breath. Merrin stepped closer. "Place your hand on her." Caleb did. The bark was cold, rough, but there was a pulse beneath it, faint, steady, and then something rushed through him, a memory, not his own, snow falling in spirals, a wolf's cry, firelight flickering over a girl's smiling face, a hand slipping from his in a hospital room, a howl echoing through a dark forest. He staggered back, gasping. Merrin didn't react, just nodded. "She shows us what we forget," he said. "Not to punish, but to remind." Caleb's breath shook in his chest. "What was that?" "Grief," Merrin said softly. "Turning into love." They stood there for a long time. Then Merrin turned to go. "I'll leave you to her," he said. "You still have things to say." Caleb watched him vanish into the trees. Then he turned back to the Hollow Sentinel, and he spoke. Not loud, not fluent, but honest. He told the tree about Mary, about how she'd once danced in the rain wearing nothing but boots and a grin, about how she used to make up songs for chipmunks and write stories in the margins of recipe books, about how she'd died too young, too fast, leaving a silence behind her so wide Caleb had nearly fallen in. He told the tree about Wren, about how her eyes had mirrored the woods and her breath had reminded him that not all things broken stayed that way. He spoke until the sun began to fall behind the trees. Then he sat at the base of the trunk and wept. Not loudly, just fully. When he returned to camp that night, something was different. Not the air, not the fire, but him. He slept without, dreaming for the first time in years. 3 weeks had passed since Wren vanished into the trees with her pack. 3 weeks since Caleb Hart had stood before the Hollow Sentinel and let himself remember, let himself feel. In that time, the forest had changed. The snow was retreating, curling back from the roots and trails like a tide pulled inward. Patches of brown and green had begun to re-emerge, and with them, life. Birds returned first, finches and jays, small and bright, and then the deer, stepping like ghosts through the morning fog. The nights were still bitter, but the days grew, longer, and with them, Caleb's sense of purpose shifted. He no longer walked the woods to search for signs of Mary, or places she might have loved. Now, he walked because the forest called him. Every morning, after the fire died and coffee warmed his hands, he packed a satchel with simple things: bandages, a pocket knife, salt, a small leather-bound book. Then he left camp. He didn't follow trails anymore. He followed instinct. It was Merrin who taught him that. The old man had returned twice more, always silent in his arrival, like he simply appeared from between the trees. He never stayed long. He never explained much, but he left Caleb's small lessons, feather pressed into the snow beside his tent. Observe, it meant. A piece of pine bark with sap still sticky. Heal, a pine cone wrapped in deer hide. Give. Caleb kept them in a small wooden box near his bedroll like totems, not because he believed in magic, but because somehow they worked. On the 22nd day, Caleb heard the howl. It came from the north, long and mournful, rising over the wind. He had heard many howls before, wrens' awkward attempts, the calls of hunting packs in the deep night. This one was different. It sounded wrong, panicked, strained. He turned north without thinking. The snow was deeper in the ravine he followed. Ice clung to the boulders, making his descent slow. Trees here leaned closer together, their limbs knitted like fingers in prayer. The howl came again, nearer now, cutting through the hush. Then, a yelp. Caleb broke into a run. He found them near a stream, 2 wolves, one collapsed on the bank, its side rising and falling in sharp, erratic gasps. The other, a large male, circled her, growling low and helpless. Caleb crouched low and approached slowly. The circling wolf turned on him with a snarl, teeth bared, muscles tensed. Caleb stopped, palms out, breath even. "I'm not here to hurt her," he said softly. "But she won't make it without help." The wolf didn't move, but his growl lowered. Caleb took another step forward, then knelt beside the injured wolf. Blood soaked the snow beneath her, an open gash along her hind leg, likely from a fight. Her breaths were shallow. Her eyes fluttered. He recognized her. Not by name, wolves had none, but by presence. This was Wren's mother, the one who had stepped into the firelight, the one who had watched him nurse her daughter back to life, the one who had looked at him and seen more than man. She was dying. Caleb worked quickly. He had no antibiotics, no sterile gauze, just snowmelt, cloth strips, and quiet hands. He cleaned the wound as best he could and wrapped it tightly. She whimpered once, but didn't move. The male wolf paced, nearby, ears twitching. He didn't leave until the bleeding slowed. He sat beside her as night fell, the fire crackling low between them and the growling male. The stars overhead blinked awake in the hush of cold. "You came to me once," he said, his voice barely a breath. "Trusted me when you didn't have to." The wolf didn't answer. Her eyes stayed closed. "But I'm not sure it was about me. Maybe it was about her, about Wren." He stared into the fire. "I don't know if she made it. I want to believe she did. That she runs with you now. But I can't be sure." The male wolf had stopped pacing. He sat now, head tilted slightly. "And now it's your turn to trust again." He stayed awake all night, feeding the fire, changing the dressing, keeping the cold from sinking into her bones. At dawn, the injured wolf opened her eyes, and the first thing she saw was him. She didn't growl, didn't bare her teeth. She blinked, slow and tired. The male wolf rose and padded forward, sniffing her face, her side. She made a sound, weak but present, and he licked her ear. Caleb stepped back. His work was done. He left them there, beside the fire, and began the slow climb out of the ravine. His legs trembled with fatigue. His fingers stung with cold, but his heart was steady. The next morning, There were paw prints near his camp. Not one set, two, wolves. He found no sign of them during the day, but when he returned that night, something was waiting, a gift, a length of deer sinew perfectly clean coiled beside his fire pit, wrapped in birch bark, a hunter's tool, a token. He smiled. "She's alive," he whispered. He didn't mean the wolf. Spring came slowly to the Adirondacks, like a memory returning after a long sleep. It began not with warmth, but with change. Subtle, patient. The snow thinned in patches, unveiling moss and thawing soil beneath. Creeks awakened, gurgling their way down the slopes, swollen with meltwater. The trees, still skeletal, stirred as if remembering what it meant to bloom. Caleb Hart noticed it all. He had begun to measure time not in days, but in signs. The first chorus of frogs at the pond near the south ridge. The soft green nubs pressing from the ends of maple branches. The way the sky stayed light just a little longer after supper. The forest was waking, and so too was he. For weeks now, he had remained in the same patch of wilderness, venturing only as far as the fire would carry him back before nightfall. His camp had become more than a shelter. It had become a home. He reinforced the tarp, laid pine boughs beneath his bedroll, built a ring of stones around the fire pit, and carved notches into a cedar plank to mark the days. He never counted them. He just carved. Merrin had not returned since the day of the Hollow Sentinel, but Caleb felt his presence in the trees, in the quiet, in the way a crow would land near the fire without fear, watching him with one eye as it picked through pine nuts. Wren hadn't returned either, nor had her mother, but the gifts continued. Sometimes it was a sprig of rosemary tucked between two stones, other times a strip of hide or a feather, always placed precisely, deliberately, never explained. And Caleb answered. He began leaving offerings of his own, slices of dried apple, a circle of stones, a whittled carving of a bear cub. One day, he left a locket. Inside, it was a photo of Mary, taken just 2 summers before her illness. She stood barefoot in the middle of a river, jeans rolled to her knees, holding a frog in her hands and laughing like the world couldn't touch her. Her joy was so alive in that image, it hurt to look at it. He placed it beneath a birch tree and whispered, "She would have loved you." The next morning, the locket was gone. In its place sat a single red leaf, too early for spring, too late for autumn. Its edges shimmered faintly, as if painted with dew. Caleb pressed it into the pages of his notebook and didn't ask questions. That was the day the voice returned. It came with the wind, not loud, not with words, just presence, like the air, had shaped itself into meaning and spoken without sound. He stood near the edge of the clearing, the leaf tucked in his coat pocket, and felt it ripple through him. Not Mary, not exactly, but not her either. A warmth, a breath, a knowing. He turned to the trees. "I hear you," he said aloud. "I don't understand yet, but I hear you." And the wind moved again like an answer. That night he dreamed. In the dream, he stood on a hill overlooking the valley. The Hollow Sentinel rose before him, its branches outstretched like arms welcoming the sky. Wolves circled its base, silent and still. Wren stood among them, taller now, her leg no longer twisted, her eyes burning with the same fierce brightness. He remembered. She stepped toward him, opened her mouth and spoke, not with a voice, but with memory, images, feelings, the smell of wet fur, the cold press of snow beneath her paws, hunger, fear, then light, warmth, his hands, his breath, firelight flickering against canvas. And one word. Trust. Then she turned, and the wolves vanished into the trees. He woke with tears drying on his cheeks and the scent of pine smoke clinging to his skin. For the first time since Mary's passing, He didn't feel alone. In late April, a storm came. It rolled over the mountains like a drumbeat, heavy and loud. Rain fell in sheets, thick and relentless, soaking the forest, turning trails to rivers. Thunder cracked the sky in jagged flashes, and wind screamed through the treetops like a wounded beast. Caleb hunkered down beneath his tarp, reinforcing the edges with stones, tying extra rope between trees to brace it. His fire was drowned in moments. Water pooled at the base of his bedding. He curled in the driest corner and waited it out, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled faintly of ash and cedar. By morning, the storm had passed, but something had changed. The forest felt wrong, not wounded, not broken, but shifted, as if something had been dislodged. He moved slowly through the drenched woods, listening. And then he saw them. Tracks, hoofprints, deep, heavy, fresh. Not deer, elk, but not just any elk. This one limped. One rear hoof dragged slightly with each step, leaving a long scrape behind it, injured. He followed the trail through thick brush and found her just past a thicket of mountain laurel. She lay half submerged in a hollow, mud streaked down her flanks, one antler snapped clean at the base. Her eyes blinked slowly, and she struggled to lift her head as he approached. Her breathing was labored. Around her the ground was torn, signs of a fall, a struggle. Perhaps she'd slipped during the storm, caught her leg in the roots. Caleb approached slowly, arms wide, low to the ground. "It's okay," he murmured. "I'm just here to help." She watched him, didn't flinch, didn't run. He saw it again. That same word, trust. He didn't carry the supplies he needed. No gauze, no clean water, no food. But he could bring them. He marked the trail with red twine and hurried back to camp. It took hours to gather everything: boil, water, bundle salve and wrappings, cut strips of hide for binding. He returned by dusk, breathless, arms full. She hadn't moved, but she was waiting. The work was difficult. He had to roll her slightly to clean the wound, a deep gash behind her rear leg, likely split open when she fell. It wasn't infected, yet, but it would be if he didn't close it soon. He worked in silence. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes closed. He stitched what he could, wrapped what he couldn't, and placed a folded wool cloth beneath her head. When he finished, he sat beside her and rested a hand on her side. She was shaking, not from pain, from fear. He didn't move, and eventually, the shaking stopped. The storm had awakened something. The next morning, Merrin returned. He stood at the edge of the clearing, staff in hand, the stormlight still caught in the folds of his cloak. "You felt it," he said. "Didn't you?" Caleb nodded. "What was it?" he asked. Merrin stepped into the camp and crouched near the fire. "A shift," he said. "A reminder." "Of what?" Merrin looked at him. "That this place isn't just old," he said. "It's watching." Caleb didn't speak. "You've touched something rare," Merrin continued. "Few people get that far. Fewer know what to do with it." Caleb looked toward the trees. "I just listened." Merrin smiled. "Sometimes that's enough." They sat together for a while, the silence comfortable now. Finally, Caleb asked, "Do you know her name?" Merrin raised an eyebrow. "The elk," Caleb said. "She has one. I feel it." Merrin nodded. "They all do. The trees, the rivers, the wind." "Do you?" Merrin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden token. On it, carved in, looping script, was a name, Orel. Caleb held it in his hands and felt something move inside him. He smiled. "Thank you." Merrin stood. "You're not done," he said. "Not yet." Then, as always, he disappeared. Caleb carried the token back to the hollow. The elk was awake now, chewing slowly on moss. Her eyes met his, and he held out the token. "Aurel," he whispered, and the wind moved through the leaves like a song. The days stretched longer now, daylight seeping deep into the woods like golden syrup poured over the world. The forest sang again, not just with birdsong and rushing creeks, but with the quiet pulse of life returning. Leaves uncurling from buds, mushrooms blooming like secrets under logs, and tiny moths spinning silver paths through the dusk. Caleb Hart felt it in his bones. He had lived in many places, rented apartments, borrowed cabins, even the back seat of a rusted Honda for a stretch in his 20s. But he'd never felt belonged anywhere. Until now. Until the woods had claimed him. Until he'd found reason in silence. He rose with the birds, bathed in the cold shallows of the nearby stream, and began each morning not with routine, but reverence. His life had grown slow, deliberate, and he had changed in ways no mirror could show. He smiled more. He laughed, sometimes out loud, and he had begun to speak, not just to himself, but to the trees, to the rocks, to the wind, to Aurel. The elk had improved more than he expected. He visited her twice daily now, checking her wounds, bringing clumps of moss, foraged berries, and whatever greens had begun to push through the thawing soil. Her limp remained, but she could stand, could move. Sometimes she was gone when he arrived, off grazing or exploring, and he'd wait in the hollow until her soft eyes reappeared through the brush. Once, she let him stroke her muzzle. It lasted less than a heartbeat, but it stayed, with him for hours. She had known pain, and still, she trusted. And that, Caleb thought, was the definition of courage. One morning, while foraging near a grove of young firs, he heard it again. The strange hush, the shift in the air, not wind, not bird, just stillness. Then a voice, not Merrin's, called softly from the ridge above him. "Don't move." It was female, sharp, controlled. Caleb froze. From between the trees stepped a figure, slim, wrapped in a hunter's poncho, a compound bow slung across her back and binoculars at her chest. Her dark hair was braided down one shoulder. Her eyes were narrowed. "You're Caleb Hart," she said. He turned slightly. "I am." She descended the slope quickly, boots silent. On the moss, she stopped 10 feet from him, hand resting near her belt. "My name's Dana Mallard," she said. "I'm with the New York Wildlife Service." His stomach dropped. "I'm not here to arrest you," she added, noticing the tension. "Not unless you're poaching." "I'm not." "I know," she paused. "My sister sent me." "Jenny?" Caleb asked. Dina nodded. "She said you were out here with a bear cub, then a wolf pack, then an injured elk. She wasn't sure if you were a saint or just profoundly lucky." Caleb didn't answer. "She also said you might need help," Dina continued, "whether you know it or not." He gestured to a nearby log, and they sat. The woods didn't speak. Neither did he. Finally, Dina broke the quiet. "Most people don't last out here, especially not after everything." She didn't say Mary's name. She didn't need to. "I wasn't trying to last," Caleb replied. "I just wanted to find what she saw, what she believed in." "And did you?" He looked around, at the moss, the morning light, the hollow in the trees where Aurel would appear later. "Yes." Dina studied him. Her eyes softened slightly. "My sister told me you helped a wolf pup survive, that the mother brought her to you. She did. That kind of trust doesn't happen." He looked away. "I didn't understand it either, still don't." "But you honored it." Caleb nodded. "I came to check on you," Dina said. "But I also came to warn you." "Warn me?" "There are men coming," she said. "Not rangers, not state-sanctioned." "What kind of men?" "Hunters, unlicensed, the kind who don't care about the balance. They track for pelts, trophies, and cash." He felt a chill move through him. "Word spreads," she continued. Whispers of a man living with wolves, an elk too tame to run, a bear cub seen crossing the creek trail. They think it's a story, a legend. It's not. I know that. But they're coming anyway. When? A week, maybe less. He clenched his fists. Can you stop them? I'll try. But it would be easier if we moved the animals. They're not mine. I know. But I can't just... He stopped. His voice caught. Dina waited. They found me, he said softly. Not the other way around. I believe you, she said. They sat in silence. I'll come back. Tomorrow, she said finally. Help you prepare. He nodded. Then she vanished into the trees like smoke. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He rebuilt the fire 4 times, walked the perimeter of camp until his legs ached, and sat for hours, beside the hollow where Aurel rested. I don't know if you understand me, he said to her. But there are men coming. Men who don't see you the way I do, who won't care about your limp or your heart, or the way you waited for me when you could have fled. The elk blinked slowly. He pressed his forehead against hers. I won't. Let them take you. Dina returned the next day with a backpack of supplies and a map marked with hunter sightings. We'll move her north, she said, beyond Miller's Run. It's protected there, and remote. Caleb stared at the trail. She won't make it on foot. I brought something. From the edge of the trees, she whistled. A moment later, a large grey mule stepped into view, saddled and carrying packs. His name's Jude, Dina said. He's slow, but solid. They spent the rest of the day building a sling. Caleb spoke to Aurel the whole time, explaining, calming, whispering stories of wind and healing and stars. When the time came, she stepped forward without protest, her gait halting but determined. They secured her gently, wrapped in blankets, legs bound loosely to the frame, and then they began the trek. It took 3 days. They crossed rivers, scaled ridges, sheltered beneath pine canopies during the rain. Dina led the way, map in hand, Jude plodding behind her. Caleb walked beside Aurel, hand on her shoulder the entire time. He told her stories, of Mary, of Wren, of the Hollow Sentinel, of the time he thought he'd never love again, of the moment he realized he already had. On the 3rd day, they reached the sanctuary. Miller's Run was a vast stretch of wild, untouched land, rimmed by cliffs and shielded by old-growth forest. Few dared to hike its trails, and even fewer knew how to find the hidden path through the rock face that led to the interior glen. That's where they left her. Aurel stepped off the sling and walked on her own into the clearing. She paused once, looked back, and let out a soft, guttural hum. Then she vanished into the trees. Dina placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. She'll be okay, he nodded. But his chest ached. That night, by a fire near the sanctuary's border, Dina poured tea and asked, Will you go back? To the cabin? He asked. She shook her head. To the world. He looked up at the stars. I don't know, he said. I think I am in the world. Just not the one most people see. She smiled. Jenny was right about you. Caleb chuckled. I'll escort the hunters away, she promised. You focus on keeping this place alive. I will. Good, she said, because I think they're going to need you. Who? She stirred the fire. All of them, she said. The ones who remember. The hunters came at dawn. Caleb Hart heard them before he saw them. The snap of branches under careless boots, the metallic clatter of gunmetal against belt buckles, the hushed laughter of men who had no reverence for the silence they shattered. He crouched behind a fallen pine near the southern ridge, heart thudding not with fear, but with focus. Dina had warned him. They'd come in 2s and 3s, splitting into loose packs, dressed in camo, but with eyes that didn't know how to read the forest. They didn't see the way frost still clung to the undersides of ferns, or the way the birds had gone silent, shadows flickering from branch to branch in retreat. They didn't know they were being watched, and not just by him. From the edge of the ravine, Caleb saw them pass, the three in front, rifles slung low, shoulders hunched. They didn't look like poachers from old films. They looked like anyone, tired, greedy, focused. But there was something colder in the way they moved. No awe, no hesitation, just hunger. Caleb waited until they passed, then slipped through the underbrush and circled wide. By now, he knew every bend in the trail, every hollow log, every place the moss grew thick enough to muffle footsteps. He moved like smoke, like the wind, just as Merrin had taught him. He reached the edge of the eastern clearing and paused. One of them stood there, alone, tall, lean, face half-shadowed by a cap. He wasn't armed, not visibly. He knelt beside something in the leaves, a set of paw prints preserved in the wet dirt, not fresh, but not old either. Wolf. The man studied them closely, then stood and looked into the trees. His eyes passed over Caleb's hiding place, stopped, then moved on. But Caleb knew. He had been seen. The man moved on, but slower now, more careful, more curious. Caleb waited, breath shallow, until the man disappeared between two oaks. Then he turned back toward camp. They knew. They were too close. It was time to act. Dina arrived at dusk, her face grim, her boots wet from crossing the flooded creek. She didn't knock, just stepped into the lean-to and sat near the fire. "They're looking for more than animals," she said. "They're looking for you," I figured. "They think you've got some kind of secret, something worth hunting." "I don't." "You do," she said, "but not the kind they can take." Caleb stirred the embers with a stick. "I want to move them," he said. "Who?" "All of them." She blinked. "The wolves?" He nodded. "They don't belong in this part of the forest anymore," he said. "Not with men like this coming through. Not with that kind of malice in the wind." "And where would you take them?" "The old quarry, south of the Hollow Sentinel. It's deep, protected. There's water, cover. It's sacred ground." Dina hesitated. "Do you think they'll follow you?" "I don't know." "Then why try?" He looked at her. "Because someone once trusted me with her child, and someone else gave me her name, and I have to believe that trust is a path that doesn't end." She said nothing for a long time. Then, "I'll buy you 3 days. After that, I can't hold them back." Caleb nodded. 3 days. It would have to be enough. The next morning, Caleb returned to the clearing where Wren had first walked. He knelt there, hands pressed to the soil, and closed his eyes. He remembered the scent of her fur, the sound of her breath, the way her eyes had looked when she realized she was not going to die. He whistled, a low, soft sound, the same note he'd used at the stream, the one Mary had taught him when they'd tracked deer once long ago. At first, nothing. Then a rustle, and then eyes, gold and watchful, from the shadows. Wren. She stepped forward slowly, taller now, her coat full and glossy, her gait fluid. The splint was long gone, her limp had faded. She moved like smoke. Behind her came 3 others, 2 greys and 1 smaller, pale as winter mist. The pack. She recognized him. Of course she did. He didn't reach for her, didn't speak, just sat. She came to him, pressed her head gently into his chest, and he wept. They left the next day. Caleb led them not with commands, but with steps. He walked slowly, with care, and they followed, weaving between trees, pausing often to sniff, to listen. They trusted him because he never tried to lead, only to walk. He scattered dried meat along the trail, marked trees with cloth soaked in pine and cedar, scents they'd come to associate with safety. He sang, sometimes softly. Not for them, for himself. The journey took 2 days. They crossed a shallow valley where fog clung like breath, skirted a frozen pond whose surface still mirrored the sky in broken silver shards. They climbed the narrow spine of Ridgeback Pass, where the trees grew sideways and the stones hummed with the memory of ancient water. And finally, they reached the quarry. It was nothing like the maps had shown. Wider, deeper, alive. The forest had swallowed its edges, softened the sharp scars of old machinery with ivy and thyme. A creek trickled down one wall into a basin filled with cattails and frogs. The wolves stopped. They circled the edge, and then, one by one, descended. Wren was the last to follow. She turned, met his eyes, and let out a single breath, then vanished into the green. He stayed for a while, watching, listening, until night came and the stars blinked overhead like promises. Then he returned to camp. Dana was waiting. "You did it," she said. "For now, they're safe. So am I." She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "They'll keep coming," she said. "I know, and one day they'll come for you." He looked at her, and for the first time in months, he truly smiled. "Let them," he said. "I'll be ready." Summer came to the mountains like a hymn, slow, swelling, radiant. Gone was the white hush of snow and the long blue silences of winter. In their place came the rhythm of rain on leaves, the thick hum of bees moving like secrets between blossoms, and the pulse of warm air rising through the underbrush. Caleb Hart had not left the forest in 102 days. Not once. Not for supplies. Not for news. Not even for the hollow noise of civilization that had once filled his life with calendar pages and half-finished tasks. He didn't need it anymore. What he needed lived in the heartbeat of the woods. He had stopped counting the days after Dina left. Her parting had been quiet, a touch to his shoulder, a single promise. "I'll keep the path clear as long as I can." He believed her, but he no longer expected her to return. That was the way of things here. You gave what you could, then you let go. Since moving the wolves, he'd spent his time between the quarry and the hollow sentinel, walking old trails, checking snare lines not for prey, but to make sure no one else had left them behind. He found one near the ridge, a rusted jaw trap buried under pine needles. It had snapped shut on nothing but moss. He disarmed it, crushed it beneath a rock, and left a small stone carving in its place. A bear cub, carved in silence. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was for Baxter. Maybe it was for himself. It was on the 12th day of summer that the child arrived. It began with smoke. Caleb was perched on the bluff above the creek, fishing with a line knotted from braided horsehair, when he saw the haze curling up from the trees due east. Not the thick black smoke of fire, but the pale grey drift of a chimney. He dropped the line. There were no cabins out here, no sanctioned camps, and no fires that belonged. He moved fast, staying low, keeping to the underbrush, his steps silent on the moss. The trail was faint, but fresh, prints the size of small boots, pressed into damp soil. No adult prints, no cart, tracks, just the child. He found her near a thicket of mountain laurel, crouched beside a cold fire pit, her hands wrapped around her knees, eyes wide. She couldn't have been older than 10, tangled red hair, mud on her cheeks. A flannel shirt, 3 sizes too large. She saw him the moment he stepped into view, but she didn't scream. She stood up. "You're the man who talks to trees," she said. Caleb blinked. "That's what they told me," she added. "The woman in the ranger jacket, the one with the braid, Dina, she'd sent her." He crouched. "What's your name?" "Ellie," she said. "Ellie Blake." He nodded. "I'm Caleb." She nodded back. They stood there for a long moment, Then she said, "I need you to help me find the hollow tree." They walked in silence at first. Ellie moved like someone who had been on her own for a while, watchful, hungry, uncertain. She didn't ask questions. She didn't complain. But she kept glancing at him like he might vanish if she blinked too long. He gave her water and dried apple slices. She accepted both wordlessly. After an hour, she finally spoke. "My mum's gone." He looked over gently. "I'm sorry." She said she was going to get help. That was 3 days ago. "Where were you before?" "In a van. We were camping. But she got sick." He paused. "Did Dina find you?" "No. I walked. I followed the birds." He frowned. "The birds?" "They were circling, a hawk and a crow. The crow looked at me, then flew east." She said it like it made perfect sense. He didn't question her. Not here. Not in a place where wolves had chosen him and trees had whispered Mary's name. They walked for hours. When they reached camp, Ellie stopped at the edge of the clearing. "This is it, isn't it?" He tilted his head. "What is?" "The place, the one in the stories, the one where things come back." He felt a chill crawl up his spine. He hadn't spoken of the Sentinel to anyone but Merrin, and Merrin had disappeared. He watched her walk toward the fire pit and crouch beside it. Then very softly, she said, "I dreamed about this place." That night, Caleb watched her sleep in the lean-to, curled in a borrowed blanket, her breath slow and steady. He didn't sleep. He sat outside, staring at the moon and wondering what it meant when the forest sent you a child. In the morning, she was gone. Panic rose in him like a flood. He searched the clearing, the trail, the stream. But no sign, no note. Then he saw it. Paw prints, wolf, small, familiar, wren. He followed them. They led not away, but toward the hollow sentinel. He ran. When he reached the grove, he found them both. Ellie, sitting cross-legged at the base of the great tree, her hands resting gently on the bark, and Wren lying beside her like a dog at rest. Neither moved, neither spoke. He stepped into the clearing, breathless. Ellie looked up. "She's not afraid," she said, nodding at Wren. "She told me you found her when she was broken." He stared. "She doesn't talk like we do," Ellie added. "But she remembers." "How did you know where to go?" "I followed the whisper." She stood. "I think I'm supposed to stay here." He hesitated. She stepped forward, placed something. In his hand, it was a smooth river stone, warm despite the cool morning. "Mom gave me this," she said. "Said I'd know who to trust when the stone got warm again." Caleb looked at the stone, then at the girl, then at the wolf. He understood. "I'll keep you safe," he said. "I know," she replied. And just like that, she turned and walked back toward camp. Wren followed. The next week passed in slow circles. Caleb built a second shelter beside the lean-to, using pine branches and rope. Ellie helped, tying knots like she'd done it before. She never cried, never asked for news of her mother, never said the words, orphan or alone. But at night, she curled close to Wren and held the stone. Caleb taught her to fish, to recognize edible mushrooms, to listen not just for sound, but for absence. She learned fast, faster than anyone he'd ever known. One day, while hiking toward the stream, she stopped abruptly. "Something's wrong." He froze. "What is it?" "The quiet's too loud." He listened. She was right. No birds, no insects, no breeze, just waiting. Then a sound. Boots. Men. Too close, too soon. He grabbed her hand. "Back to camp, now." They ran. When they reached the clearing, Caleb didn't hesitate. He pulled the emergency satchel from beneath the firewood. Maps, dried food, a compass. "We're going south," he said. "To the quarry." She nodded. Wren was already waiting, at the tree line, and so they vanished. They moved quickly through the forest, ducking under branches, slipping through ferns, wading across shallow streams. Caleb carried Ellie when she tired, but mostly she kept pace. Wren stayed ahead, guiding them like a shadow. By nightfall, they reached the quarry. Safe for now. Ellie sat beside the small stream at the basin's edge, dipping her fingers into the water, whispering to herself. "What are you saying?" Caleb asked. She looked up. "I'm telling her where we are. Your mother." She shook her head. "No," she said. "The forest." Dawn bled slowly over the rim of the quarry, the sky unravelling from charcoal into rose, then into gold. Caleb Hart sat on the stone ledge overlooking the hollow where Ellie slept. Wren curled beside her like a sentry. From this height, the basin looked like a secret held in the hands of the mountain, protected, unspoken, sacred. He hadn't slept. He didn't want to. Not while time still had meaning. Not while it still felt borrowed. The night before had brought warning, smoke, faint and acrid, curling across the tops of the trees. The kind of fire men build when they believe they own the land, not the kind that asks permission. Caleb had smelled diesel beneath it. He knew what it meant. The hunters were close. Again, this time they wouldn't just pass through. They were searching for something. Maybe for him. Maybe for Ellie. Maybe for the wolves. It didn't matter. The forest had given him everything. Now it was his turn to give back. Ellie woke with a twitch of Wren's tail against her shoulder. Her eyes opened instantly, bright, alert, ancient in ways Caleb still didn't fully understand. She sat up, brushed the sleep from her eyes, and climbed the slope to join him. "They're coming," she said. He nodded. "I dreamed it," she added. "But also, I just know." Caleb looked at her, then out across the tops of the trees. "Do you want to leave?" She shook her head without hesitation. "This place matters," she said. "They can't take it." He exhaled. It had taken him months to learn what she'd accepted in weeks. "What should we do?" he asked her. She crouched and pulled out the smooth river stone she always carried. For a long moment, she held it between her palms, eyes closed. Then she said, "We wake the forest." They started at the Hollow Sentinel. It was where all things began. Wren led them through trails worn only by paws and wind, trails no map had ever known. When they arrived, the grove was filled with birdsong and the perfume of warm earth. Spring had arrived fully now. Wildflowers bloomed in spirals around the base of the ancient tree. Caleb and Ellie knelt side by side. "What do we say?" he asked. "Nothing," Ellie said. "She already knows." They pressed their hands to the bark. Caleb felt it again, that low, deep hum, like breath wrapped in memory. He closed his eyes. He thought of Mary, of Baxter, of Aurel, and the quiet, strength in her wounded gaze, of Wren, whimpering on his porch, of Ellie, walking out of the woods like a dream with dirt on her cheeks and prophecy in her bones. And the sentinel answered. Not in words, not even in sound, but in the sudden stillness of the air, the hush of the birds, the tremble beneath his feet. The forest was listening. It was awake. It was ready. They moved quickly. Ellie knew which animals would help. She stopped at a red pine where a family of martens had made their den and whispered something low and strange. One by one, the tiny creatures blinked at her, then disappeared into the brush. A horned owl joined them silently, gliding above the canopy. Wren's pack emerged from the ravine, 3 strong, silent shapes, flanking their pale sister without command. Aurel appeared by the edge of the stream. She was thinner now, older, in the eyes, but her limp was gone. She watched Caleb for a long time, then turned and walked toward the trail that wound toward the ridge. She would lead the path north. A signal to the others. It was Merrin who arrived last. Caleb found him waiting, in the clearing outside his old camp, standing by the dead fire pit, staff in hand. You called? He said, eyes twinkling. I didn't know how, Caleb admitted. You didn't need to. The forest listens to grief like a mother listens to her child. We need help. I know. Merrin stepped forward and placed something in Caleb's palm. A tiny pouch, soft and feathered, filled with powder. What is it? Memory, Merrin said. Scatter it in the path of those who mean harm. Let the forest remind them who they are. Caleb didn't ask questions anymore. They built the defense over the course of a day, not with weapons, not with traps, but with truth. They placed feathers in the branches, symbols of presence. They braided moss and pine needles into patterns that would unsettle those who didn't belong. They lit 3 fires, one in the quarry, one at the Sentinel, one at the original camp. Smoke signals, yes. But more than that. Calls, messages to the wild things, to remember, to rise. That night, the hunters came. Caleb heard them before he saw them, and this time he stood waiting. It was a strange thing to witness. Men moving with rifles through a place they did not understand. Eyes wide, shoulders tight, boots too loud. They were 7, in total. One of them, tall, pale, sharp-jawed, was the one Caleb had seen before, the one who'd paused over wolf tracks. He stepped into the clearing. Caleb stood alone, hands at his sides. The forest behind him. You're trespassing. The man said. No, Caleb replied. You are. The man raised his gun slightly. You're harboring protected wildlife. I'm standing in a place that remembers what men forget. The man sneered. You gonna stop us? No, Caleb said. The forest will. The wind moved. Something rustled high in the canopy. A howl rose. Low, long, close. The wolves were circling. Martins screamed from the branches above. A horned owl shrieked across the treetops. Then the ground shifted. Not violently, just enough. The man stumbled. Something unseen pressed against him. An old fear, not of death, but of meaning. He looked into Caleb's eyes and saw no anger, only grief and resolve. What are you? The man asked. Someone who was lost, Caleb said. Not anymore. He took a step forward, and the man took a step back. He wasn't alone. The other hunters looked uneasy. Guns lowered. One turned, then another. Within moments, they were gone, disappearing down the trail without firing a shot. Caleb stood still, though forest breathed around him. Ellie stepped from the trees, Wren at her side. They won't come back, she said. No, Caleb replied. They know now. The rest of the summer passed like a long, gentle exhale. Ellie stayed. Caleb never asked her to. She built her own shelter beside his, learned to snare fish with her hands, learned to name birds not by their colours, but by the way they moved between shadows. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't. It didn't matter. The wolves stayed near. Aurel returned once, her coat brighter than ever, with a young calf at her side. Merrin vanished again. But his staff appeared one morning beside the Sentinel, leaned carefully against the bark. A gift. A trust. In late August, Caleb returned to the spot where he had once found Wren. He stood there in the dappled sun, the air thick with the smell of pine and the faint song of distant water. He closed his eyes, spoke aloud. Mary, I didn't find the place you described. Not exactly, he smiled, but I think I found what you meant. He opened his eyes, looked down. At his feet, in the moss, lay a sprig of lavender. Fresh, impossible. He picked it up, pressed it to his lips, and whispered, Thank you. The forest remembers. It remembers the wounded and the healed, the ones who stay and the ones who return. It remembers the quiet ones, the soft ones, the lost ones. It remembers Caleb Hart, who came with nothing and gave everything. It remembers Ellie Blake, child of dreams, daughter of stone, sister of wolves. It remembers Mary, whose love was deeper than death. It remembers Baxter and Aurel and Wren. It remembers you, even now, because the forest forgets no one who listens. And in the end, the path never really ends. It just leads home. The end.